Hello and welcome to another Multiplayer Monday. I'm George Gonzalez and I'm obsessed with making games. And we're going to talk about debugging and some of the tools or things I do to debug multiplayer games. Um, because as you start your journey in multiplayer games, you will first need to understand how things work, and it's going to be hard. I am really bad with documentation. And so for me, I learn more by just testing it and being practical. Testing is a lot easier non-VR environments like mobile, PC are so much easier because you can just populate multiple windows in the same screen. Okay, what you have to watch out for is when you do make, even if you're like in the editor or you have multiple instances, even if you don't have to make a build, there's problems with that because if you're in the same computer, let's say, and you have a keyboard input, it's going to do the same input regardless of which computer you're in. So you have to make sure that you have a way of separating those inputs. And when you're in VR, you only have one headset connected, and so even if you switch, there's certain inputs that are constantly happening. And so the character controller is a huge one. What I like to do most of the time is to make a build and then play that in my headset and then play in the editor. Um, and that is mostly, and you'll see me in the live streams that I usually test things out like that. So I'm gonna go through and we're gonna go through from beginning to end, from how I start out debugging and how I debug after I publish a game, so you can understand that. Okay, so first of all, the easiest way is to hit play, right? I like to make sure it's working in single player, at least so that's working. Because if it's not working there, then there's no point in fixing it the other way. Now you need to really test. You can have someone else play it with you, but making a build is huge because that will help you. If the editor has where you can do multiple instances, and that typically is really nice for quick debugging sessions. Okay, you hit play, you open up another instance, you play again, and you test things out. The thing is that you can't get too critical about some errors like the inputs, because sometimes you'll have where you are moving in one player, but the other player is doing other stuff too, because you're taking into inputs and whatnot. Ideally, at some point, you want to test with other players and you in the editor so you can see what's going on. The other thing that you have to be aware of is who's the host, because even in Relay or other peer to peer games, there's always someone that's in charge of the game state. And you want to be able to test that out. And if you have a headless server, you're going to have to test the server as well, being able to monitor the server. And it's really hard with the headless servers, because you don't have like you can't look around the server, right? It's blank, and oftentimes is run on a Linux server, and so it's not like an editor hit play and look at what's going on. So usually I have this tool called Proxima. Proxima is really good for looking at what's going on in the consoles, and it connects. So I'm going to show you how it works in a little bit. But the main thing is, okay, now does it work for two players? Okay, when I'm the host, how does this behave? And then how does it behave when I'm not the host? Is it still working the same way? Are the functionalities like lining up what I see? If this person hits it, do I see it? Okay, well, if I hit it, does that person see it? And do I see it? So like you have to run almost twice as many edge cases, because there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And then you have the build. You have to build it to the device and test it out. And if it's on mobile, or PC, luckily, like there's a lot of players that can help. There's a lot of people that have mobile devices that you can sideload it and test. That's why on iOS you have TestFly, Google Play console. You have the beta. You can give beta access to people. On PC you have Steam, again beta channels. Meta for VR, you have beta channels. SideQuest, you have it. Itch.io, you can publish things and have people play testing. And you want to make sure the other thing with testing and pushing builds, if you're going to be in the editor while they play, is to be aware that if the multiplayer builds have to match. Let's say I change something that's a network version. Like if I change anything in here, there's not going to be any problems. But if I go and change, let's say, a spell, right? So if I go into here with the prefabs and I change a spell that has to do with network setup, like let's say this water over spell, and we have the network bubble, and in here we have network components. So if I start changing these things, and even changing this script, and I try to play with someone else, there's going to be a mismatch in what these things are trying to do, because it's trying to sync. Okay, and so you have to be aware of that. You can't do that, especially even more so with a headless server. And that's why usually headless servers take a lot longer to test, because you have to build the headless server, and then if you update any code, you have to then build the client and then test those out. And so every time you have to make two builds to test a change, and it gets really complicated and hard. And so the cost is even bigger with a headless server. So I tend to like peer to peer because it's just one build, and you just figure it out that way. Um, the other thing is that you have to be aware of what's going on, and so that's why I like this Proxima tool. I'm going to show you right now how it works. And this is specifically local. Proxima has a free tier and a paid lifetime period, and I think it's going to have a subscription later on. They're working on a way to test these without having to have local connection. So you can connect to someone else that has Proxima installed in their game. Like, so if you publish the game with Proxima, you could test out things. What I'm doing right now with Proxima is I only put it on the builds that I want to test. Okay, because this is going to give him access to the variables and be able to change those things live. I like this because I can visually see what's going on with the components, especially multiplayer games, because there's debugging is not enough. Like oftentimes, if you're doing single player, debugging is enough to the console, and you can print out statements if things go wrong. But oftentimes, there's a lot of moving parts, and I want to be able to see them at runtime. So I'll show you how it works. For Android, you have to use HTTPS. Typically, you choose your own password when you're logged in at runtime, but I'm using this thing to test. So usually the password doesn't matter because I'm not going to launch the game with it, Proxima. This is just for testing. And then I run on enable. I just initialize. Okay. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to turn it on and I'm going to show you how it's going to work. Okay. So once it logs in, it'll create a thing. And this is great for me for VR because in VR, it gets really hard. But no matter what you're doing, you're always going to want to see things and how they're multiplayer. And I'm just showing you what's in the editor, but it's the same thing for when you're in the device. You put in your IP address. For me, it always changes, so it doesn't matter if you see my IP address. Okay, so it's unsafe, but it really isn't. But I connect, I put in the password, so it'll detect this if you have to type in the IP address and the numbers that you put in for the host. And here, you can see that I put 77 for the port. You can put whatever port you want, so you have the IP address and the port. And eventually, Proxima has in beta right now has a way of connecting to this without having to be locally. So like if you try to do this right now, you can't connect to me. Like it's only if you're in the same network. That's why you have to put I had to put my own IP address. But anyway, so I have this, I set up the password, I enter the password. This setup is not advised to do it this way. I'm doing it right now because this is how I do it locally. I just do a quick test. I'm going to check. And as I play, I can look at the logs the same way as in Unity. And then I can also look at the inspector. So I can see the central room. I can go in here, don't destroy and load. I can see the Proxima tool. I can see the connection. I can see how things are going. I can figure things out at runtime. Okay, so I can see if things are enabled or disabled. And this is a very nice tool. And you have the console. If you wanted to execute certain commands, you could do that at runtime. There's really good stuff. And there's a free version and there's a paid version that gives you this inspector view. With a free version, you can do the logs if you want. I like the tool because I can see what's going on while I'm playing. So this is an example of what it would look like as you're playing. But usually for the editor, you don't need it. This is beneficial when you're in the build, in your phone or on the iPad. I can connect my computer to it and see what's going on with my iPad build. Okay, so it's very valuable. Okay, the other thing one last thing that I'm gonna go over when you launch the game live. How do you monitor that? Because oftentimes when you push a build to live, now you have you have to figure out, okay, like I can't push the game with this because this is gonna connect everybody to a local network and you have access to the game. So what I do is I make an identical build that's has a different version number, but I upload it to a side channel or I put it on my headset directly. And with that build, I do put the Proxima plugin. So I make a separate build that has Proxima in there so I can see the logs. And so what I'll do is as soon as I publish a build, an update, I'll also make a new build that's identical. It just has Proxima in it. And then with that tool, I can connect with the same people that are playing the game live and check to see if there's any errors or what's going on as people playing live. Because when people start playing live, you'll notice that things behave a lot differently. But the main reason why I'm trying to talk to you through about debugging things in multiplayer games is because that's how you'll learn how things really behave. Because oftentimes you'll type things and you'll think they work one way, but they don't. And so you have to really get your mind in the right space and trying to think the right way. And as you start getting to the hang of what's going on, you will be able to then code knowing exactly what's going to happen. And even then, when you know, it's hard to really understand everything. It's really hard. I've done this for 3 years, and maybe, yes, I could have done better, but like 3-4 years, and I'm still making mistakes, right? Like there's multiple ways of doing the same thing. So let's see if we look at components. These are not network. These are all single player. There's nothing in here really that aside from like the rig. So we have the fusion in here, fusion rig in here, and we can tell what's going on. We can see, remove that. And you can see that I don't have the VR controllers on because the hands are still there. But if I put in the controllers, I could see where it's going. So this way I can debug the fusion rig from the local rig, right? Because this is, the local rig is here. It's in the same place as the other, right? There's the rig. Okay, so if I go in here and control, this is what I can control. Let me see, I think, yeah, kinematic. Now I can actually control the player. Let me see if it'll let me. And you'll see that it also controls my fusion rig. Okay, so it's connecting correctly. And it's showing where their hand is. They're both in the same place. So the hand's still in the same place regardless. So these are things that in the editor you can check. I can check in Proxima. And the main thing is yeah, you just have to see what's going on and actually try to reverse engineer what's going on. Okay, like I anticipate this is going to happen when I do this, and then it either happens or it doesn't. You're trying to be like Sherlock Holmes. You're trying to deduct what is the cost of this, and you have to be very logical. This led to this, to this, to this, right? And you have to debug, you have to look at it, you have to test it. And in multiplayer games, you're going to have to constantly do it with multiple people. Or like, okay, this is the first player, they do this, and then the second player does this, and what happens? And you have to try to replicate it and try to fix it. It's hard enough to be a developer in general, and then it's even harder to do multiplayer games. But you can do it. You have to get your feet wet, and you have to do the work. There's no skipping it. No matter how many tutorials you dissect or how many templates you use, at the end of the day, like the template, if you only copy paste stuff, it's not going to get you farther. Because even if you're able to publish a game based on a template and you tweak a few things, when it launches live, you have to be able to fix it, or else your game's going to go poop because you can't fix it. And so you have to get in there and figure it out. And these are some of the things that I do to figure it out. I hit play, I make builds. If it's not VR, you can play multiple instances. I've tried multiple instances in VR. It just gets a little bit confusing because you're like, why is this not working? And I've seen people that are like, oh, my head is tracking differently. So because the same input is going into your cable. Like there's no way to separate that. And so that's why I like to do a build in the VR headset, and then I hit play in the editor and I can see myself. And in the editor, I just control it with my keyboard and mouse, or I just drag it around in the scene, which I can do. So those are the things that I do. Ideally, I would take the time to set up a controller rig that I can use with WASD. Those are nice. I know VRIF has one, and it did really. It's awesome to have because it's a nightmare to have to move the rig around and check boxes off and on to make sure you can get to places. So if you can do a WASD with a space for jump or something like that, it'd be a character controller for your VR rig. It helps with testing a lot. Okay? If you have any questions about debugging or things that you're struggling with in a multiplayer game, don't be afraid to leave the comments below. If you have questions about your own multiplayer game, you can join Endgames, where we do one-on-ones and help you get your specific needs solved for your game. And so we'll see you in the next video.